Heath, we talk to a lot of owners and they come to us saying they need more sales, they need a better team, they need, better processes. And what we usually find is that they're trying to fix their feelings and they're not actually fixing what's broken. And that's not a motivation problem. That's a clarity problem. It's a diagnosis problem. I mean, if you go to the doctor, we've had this conversation before, and they're just like, here, take some more painkillers, right? Like eventually you might get hooked on those painkillers, but you're not solving the actual problem. So from where you sit, how often do you think leaders are fixing the wrong problem?
And you and I've joked with you that I kind of am a person who loves to be in control. And so maybe in some ways it's a strength. I actually love to, focus on things I can actually do something about. And I can't necessarily do something about the things we just talked about, but I can dig deeper and go, is there something that's causing some of this that I might be able to do something about? And I think that that's where a lot of our business owners miss the mark sometimes, is they focus so intently on those external surface level symptoms, but there's actually some things going on below the surface that if they would deal with could bring some permanent fixes and permanent changes into their business in these specific areas where they're having symptoms.
Yeah. And again, like the symptom being there is pain and the goal is to eliminate that pain, right? So they're making decisions that may be dulling that pain temporarily, but it's not solving the problem, which I think back to, okay, how do you get into this trap? So we can talk about how you get out of it later. I think symptoms are really easy to notice, right? They rise to the surface and the root cause, that diagnosis, it takes work, it takes effort. And to your point, as a leader, that is your job. That is literally your job, is to say, okay, hang on a second. We're going to investigate. We're going to deep dive. And some of those common symptoms that we notice are things like sales ups and downs, or your team's frustrated, or things are just chaotic all the time. And, symptoms are loud, right? Causes are usually quiet. And so you again, I love analogies, right? And you're a car guy. You could take your car into the shop if it's making a noise and have them really fix it, or you can just turn the radio up really loud, roll the windows down, right? Like that might take care of it. So I'm curious if there's been any examples of you just turning the radio up instead of actually opening the hood.
Yeah, I've experienced that quite often, and sales is my background, and so I've seen it a lot there. And one of I would say the first areas I noticed that in is when you've got a salesperson and they're not performing for whatever reason, and the first knee jerk reaction of most leaders is get them out. They're the problem, and I would just say I've learned over the years how difficult it is to rehire, retrain, get somebody who believes in our values. It's a long process. So before we take that person and just throw them out without digging into this, I would suggest that we start and look at anything maybe we as leaders or as the business can do to affect this problem. Again, it's fine with me if you want to throw them out the door, but you're going to pay the price as the owner to get the next person up to speed. And that's an example I see of treating symptoms, where owners and leaders will just bring one in after another like a conveyor belt until they find somebody who can stick to the wall. What's actually happening is they're just looking for somebody who can deal with their messed up system. And so I suggest let's dig a little deeper and see if we can actually fix the system. Is there anything going on in our sales process, in our sales training, that actually might be a root cause of why this person isn't performing? And that is not usually the first question a fast moving leader is going to look at, but it's the one I think is most important. Let's pause and say, is there anything going on with this person that might be solvable at the business level so that we can save this person and avoid deeper pain, which is the firing process and the rehiring and retraining process? It's not usually what most owners want to do, because it means you may have missed the mark somewhere as an owner in the process that you built out to train your people and to prepare them for success. But I often find that is where the problem lies, and you end up throwing out great people because you actually gave them a really crappy process to work with.
Yeah, and kind of connected to that is the bigger picture of misaligned goals and what are we actually doing? Your salesperson, your whole team might be like thinking they're killing it because they're making 75 or 150 contacts a week or a day or whatever. But if that's all they're doing and they're not closing deals or they're not passing them on to the next stage, like that's clearly a miss, right? Because you're not growing. But a lot of times growth is very ambiguous. What does growth even look like? How do you manage growth and connect goals to growth if that growth doesn't even align with what your values are?
Right. Well, I'll be the first to say this is an area that I had to grow up in. For me as a leader, more money and more sales is perfectly okay ad nauseum for eternity. I was good with that. And what I started learning, you're one of the people that helped me with some of this, is that that doesn't work for everybody, especially the people lower in the organization. They need a cause, a mission, something greater than themselves to latch onto, not just more of what we did last year. Because to me, if I'm blazing a trail, if we clear cut another half mile today, I'm good. The trail's moving forward. Great. But the team also, but where are we going? Where does this trail lead? Why are we building this trail? And it's because I was here early. I know that stuff. I get it. I don't need it. But they don't necessarily have that. And so you're right. It's very easy for you to get disgruntled people or people who are seemingly all aimed at different things in the business because they don't actually have a clear understanding of what the goal and the mission of our organization and business is. And so it's important, again, that's a symptom. We've got to get to that root cause, which is us as owners, as leaders, have not painted a picture of where are we going, what does it look like, and what great thing will happen when we get there. And then how do you, as our team member, fit into that? What is the great purpose and cause that you play within that greater whole? When you give people that, they latch onto the vision, they latch onto the mission, and then they have marching orders. They know what they're supposed to do. And so what looks like a lack of growth or haphazardness within the business may just be misaligned priorities because they thought goal was X when the goal was actually Y, and we did not do a good job of communicating that. So one of the things we help our leaders with is to make sure they take time every year to set that goal, set that 3 to 5 year plan, and then what that looks like for this coming year, and then what it looks like quarterly, so that we're all marching in lockstep and these individuals on your team buy into that mission and they can help propel your business forward. They all know what their goals are. They all know what their marching orders are. And that can bring clarity and it can bring faster growth to your business because everybody's working off the same page, so to speak.
Absolutely. Yeah, from the marketing side, just to, speak to my background and expertise a little bit, you see businesses spending a lot of money on advertising to try to grow and bring in more leads. You experimenting with new channels. You're spending a ton of money to redesign your websites and your collateral and anything else, and your message is still completely muddied. It doesn't align the customer problem with your solution. So it's got to start with the message, right? There is a hierarchy to creating a marketing plan. It starts with the words that you use. That's the thing that actually connects with people
But
and
Brent,
helps them
the
understand.
average person that comes to us doesn't come to us saying, I've got a messaging problem.
Exactly.
They come to us going, where are my customers? I run a restaurant and we're down butts to the seat year over year. Or, we are not seeing the number of oil changes that we were seeing this time last year. That's the symptom, but they don't often relate it to the messaging that might be going out to the community about the restaurant, about the oil change business, and how those customers ought to be perceiving their business and their message. Talk more a little
Yeah.
bit about that.
Yeah, no, it's easy to if you're a typical agency or your business and you go to a typical agency, they're going to give you a plan to spend more money to drive more volume, reach and engagement, and that ultimately leads to more business, whatever, right? That may be true, but you have to back up. And the framework that we use is audience, offer, outcome. All right, who is your audience? Based on where you are, based on the service you offer, based on the profile of, your ideal customer. That's where it starts. And then your offer is specifically the solution you offer to the problems that they have. And then the outcome is ultimately what changes after they work with you. It sounds pretty simple because it is, but to your point, most businesses don't start there. They
Right.
start with the symptom.
And I want to pause right here and say it is okay and understandable if you as a business owner haven't taken that step yet. We talk about this a lot here that so many of you had this great idea, you were really good in one area and you ran with it and you created this great business. That doesn't mean that you're good in every area that you may come across. My father is an optometrist and he loves taking care of his patients. He said, but they should have put us through business school when they taught us how to do this because we're starting a business. He's phenomenal with his craft, but maybe didn't have the same skills that a business major would have gotten or someone who's run a business for a long time. So don't beat yourself up if you don't necessarily possess all these skills now. That's one of the reasons we exist, is to kind of come alongside business owners and help them make sense of some of these symptom versus root cause issues like the messaging problem that you're talking about.
I love it. I love that you normalize that because, if you're running a business and you've figured out how to, provide this valuable service to people, like you're smart. You're clearly smart, right? So normalizing it, here's typically why, right? Like cuz you wonder, it's like how do smart people like miss this all the time? One, you're too close, right? You can't see the forest for the trees because you're in it all the time and you need someone to help you zoom out and see objectively. That happens in all aspects of life, not just your business, right? You're moving too fast is the next one. You don't stop to take time to diagnose because you're literally in the trenches. You're literally doing payroll. You're literally fixing the car or you're examining someone's eyes, whatever the business is. The third one is you've got too much at stake. And so you feel the risk more than anybody else around you. You've got payroll, you've got teams, you've got customers, you've got infrastructure. And so if I make the wrong decision, there's some consequences here, right? So
Right.
there's some fear, some anxiety there. So again, when pressure is high, there is temptation. How do you pump the brakes? How do you alleviate some of that risk?
The thing that I would say to the overarching conversation we're having here is, we've been talking about symptoms versus root causes. Another way to look at that is internal versus external. And I think to me, that's the way I like to frame it too, is that so many problems look like external problems that we need to go out beyond ourselves to fix. But the reality is, if we start internally, there's a lot we can do without having to go spend a whole lot of extra money, without having to, go out and figure out a problem that maybe without is beyond our reach. If it's a marketing issue, let's take the real estate market right now. If buyers aren't buying and sellers aren't selling, there's not a whole lot you can do about that as a real estate agent. But what if you could look internally and discover some things that your business could improve upon that could help you while the market is the way it is? That to me is a proactive approach to these types of things. And so you'll often hear me in these sessions that we do with our clients talking about, hey, before we go look out there, before we go look at our team members as the cause, let's look at our systems, our processes, and more importantly, ourselves as leaders and how we might be contributing to some of these root causes that if we make some adjustments, we might free of charge solve our own problems instead of just throwing money at a marketing firm, throwing money at a sales professional or some coaching program that doesn't really have a system. This is where I see a lot of business owners make mistakes, is that they don't think that they're the problem. They don't think their systems are broken, when in actuality, there is so much growth to be had if they'll dig a little bit deeper and solve those root causes.
Yes. Yes. And I think it comes back to, again, having someone to partner with who can not challenge you in a negative way, but to essentially help you understand, okay, you and I come in, we're curious, right? We're asking a lot of questions. You're not Nobody's asking you these questions on a day-to-day basis because you're just, again, you're just putting out fire after fire, you're solving problem after problem. The goal here is to you know this stuff, right? Like you're saying, you're the owner, you've been doing this for however long. We're just asking you questions that access a different part of your expertise. And then you're like, oh, yeah, well, of course, that's the answer, right? Like that's the best case scenario because we're able to see it objectively and just help you dig into that part of your knowledge base that isn't just on tuned into that dial every.
Yeah, it's just a fresh set of eyes a lot of times that we're not, in the middle of this every day. And I can't tell you how many times I have been in a session with someone and that is what happens. And it's been, hey, Heath, come sit down and tell me what you think about this. Or I've brought somebody in my office like you, Brent, I've been staring at this forever. Can you look at this and tell me what you think? And almost immediately something great comes up and it's not because one of them's smarter than the other. It's just because they haven't stared at the problem as long as you have. And something just immediately jumps out as a solution. And that's something that I find in our sessions with our owners that is very common, is because we haven't been staring at their problem too long, we can often find things that are pretty easy fixes. Something else you said that made me think of this. Another thing that I think when you're in the owner's seat, it can be a real challenge is everybody in your company, everybody on your team has someone above them that is telling them how they're doing, how they might perform better, and where they stand within the company. You're the only one that doesn't have that. The buck stops with you as the owner. And you don't have a team of people saying, hey, this could use some work. This part of our business needs some help. Your way of approaching this needs a little finesse. Who's saying that to you? You're the owner. You pay everybody's check. They're not going to come to you and do that. And that's one of the beauties of what we are doing here is that we can come alongside you, we're not, in your company and we don't have to kiss up to the owner, so to speak. We can respectfully tell you business guy to business guy what we're seeing here and what you might consider as a possible solution to some of your problems. And I think everybody needs that. It's dangerous to get out there on an island as an owner and not surround yourself with other people in business who can look at your situation and maybe give you some feedback on what's going on. That's a luxury everybody on your team has or should have in your business. And I think you should have that as well. Some of the best leaders I've ever known, you and I have worked for a few of them, they often are in other groups intentionally with other business owners to make sure they've got accountability, they've got people looking at their problems and helping them solve some of their bigger issues.
Yeah, no, 100%. So to shift the emphasis from the problem to the solution. So what changes when you fix the right thing, right? When you fix symptoms, you do get some temporary relief, but when you fix those root causes, you get stability. You get freedom, you get flexibility to work on stuff that you've been wanting to do for so long, and now you kind of actually have a different perspective and maybe a little bit more bandwidth. So I think decisions get easier. I think there's less second guessing. There are way fewer emotional swings and resets on the business, right? But when you've actually fixed root causes instead of symptoms, what felt different for you?
Well, scalability is the big one. Now, once I've got these root causes fixed, I can apply that same fix to everybody that I'm on my team. So if I've got a team of 10 salespeople and we thought we had a problem with our new salesperson, in actuality, we didn't. We had a system problem and we fixed that system. Well, now it scales across that entire team of 10 salespeople and we get all this extra growth that we would not have had before. The second
Yes.
thing is now we know what to do every single time there is an issue like this. The next time we have a problem with a salesperson, we're going to have a checklist. Have they done X, Y, and Z in our system? Have they been trained properly? Are they following what we've taught them? And we can literally identify where in the process it's breaking down and fix it right there. When you don't have a system, when you don't have a process, it could be any number of things and you don't have any way to measure it. But once you get to that root and you put in place a system, a process that you can use anywhere, you know what questions to ask and you know how to diagnose future problems. That's been my favorite thing about digging into root causes because it causes us to put a final fix on this, a cure, if you will. And once we have that, we're not just constantly giving everybody cough syrup every time, they got a cough. We actually go treat the flu and we make sure that the flu is killed, and that causes the cough to go away every single time. But if you're just treating coughs all the time with cough syrup, everybody's going to keep coughing and is always going to keep coming up. So focusing in on those root cause fixes allows for scalability, and you have the answers to the test the next time the same problem rears its head.
And I think, another thing to call out, this doesn't eliminate or reduce work. It doesn't mean you're failing. It just means that you're going to stop wasting time on work that doesn't matter or that doesn't move the needle forward. And that's the scalability piece, right? You feel every decision, it's so tight and what this does is, okay, like I said, decisions get easier. You see so much more clearly around corners and over hills because you have intentionally stood up and lifted your head and looked up and asked some of those questions that, again, like you said, you're not solving the same problem over and over again because you figured out the cure. And so
Well,
I think
you mentioned, working on what people work on and doing a lot of work and all these types of things. What I have found is that a lot of times owners are actually not working on the right things at all. And they are spending their time more on what you might describe as symptoms. And what we teach people to do is get to those root causes, solve those root causes, put a system in place for all aspects of your business. So, and that's where you spend your time is you put those systems in place and then you implement those systems, and then you're done with swatting flies and dealing with symptoms all the time. And you can actually spend your time working on things that move the business forward, things that only you as the owner can do. Oftentimes when people don't have these systems and processes in place and they're just dealing with symptoms, they find themselves working on problems way below their pay grade. And all of their time is spent on things that should not include them. We should not
that's
be
right.
bringing the owner in to a low level personnel issue. We should have a process on exactly how to deal with this issue when it comes up. And if you're being brought into that, your time's being wasted. So we help people put those systems in place that will allow them to only work on things that is worth their time and not being pulled back down into the organization where they don't belong.
So good. A system takes the heaviness and the weight of every decision off of people and creates more trust in the process, right? You've heard that. Trust the process. Trust the process, right? You hear a lot in athletics and arts and things like that, but I think there's truth to it because it takes the best of people and puts them in position to succeed versus requiring them to be at their best for every moment of every day, which is, as you know, is not sustainable. So,
Very good.
all right. So next time we're going to go a little bit deeper into some of the areas where I think, most of these problems or symptoms live, right? It's usually people, it's processes, it's plans. So you can start to really investigate and dial in which one of these areas may be holding you back. Your business probably isn't broken. It's probably you're just focused on the wrong thing. And we're here to help. So if you want to learn more, check us out at howtobusinesscoaching.com. Like this video, subscribe to this channel. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Brent.